Welcome back, listeners, to another edition of Campfire Stories, presented by the Malden Public Library. I hope Thanksgiving treated you well, and you're ready for the onslaught of the rest of the holiday season. Before we begin in earnest with reading A Christmas Carol, I wanted to give you a quick reading of an anti-Christmas ghost story. It's called The Leaf Sweeper by Muriel Spark. You might recognize the author from her other work, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. This is a wonderful book and was turned into a fantastic movie featuring Dame Maggie Smith. So you should absolutely check out both from your local library, like us. For tonight's story, it's a ghost story, but of a slightly different type than you might be used to. I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm not going to tell you any more. So, with that, let's begin. The Leaf Sweeper by Muriel Spark. Behind the town hall, there is a wooded parkland, which, towards the end of November, begins to draw a thin blue cloud right into itself. And as a rule, the park floats in this haze until mid-February. I pass every day and see Johnny Geddes in the heart of this mist, sweeping up the leaves. Now and again he stops, and jerking his long head erect, looks indignantly at the pile of leaves, as if it ought not to be there. Then he sweeps on. This business of leaf sweeping he learned during the years he spent in the asylum. It was the job they always gave him to do. And when he was discharged, the town council gave him the leaves to sweep. But the indignant movement of the head comes naturally to him, for this has been one of his habits since he was the most promising and buoyant and vociferous graduate of his year. He looks much older than he is, for it is not quite 20 years ago that Johnny founded the Society for the Abolition of Christmas. Johnny was living with his aunt then. I was at school, and in the Christmas holidays, Miss Geddes gave me her nephew's pamphlet, How to Grow Rich at Christmas. It sounded very likely, but it turned out that you grow rich at Christmas by doing away with Christmas. And so pondered Johnny's pamphlet no further. But it was only his first attempt. He had, within the next 3 years, founded his Society of Abolitionists. His new book, Abolish Christmas or We Die, was in great demand at the public library, and my turn for it came at last. Johnny was really convincing this time, and most people were completely won over until after they had closed the book. I got an old copy for 6 pence the other day, and despite the lapse of time, it still proves conclusively that Christmas is a national crime. Johnny demonstrates that every human unit in the kingdom faces inevitable starvation within a period inversely proportional to that in which 1 in every 6 industrial productivity units. If you see what he means, stop producing toys to fill the stockings of the educational intake units. He cites appalling statistics to show that 1.024% of the time squandered each Christmas in reckless shopping and thoughtless church-going brings the nation closer to its doom by 5 years. A few readers protested, but Johnny was able to demolish their muddled arguments, and meanwhile the Society for the Abolition of Christmas increased. But Johnny was troubled. Not only did Christmas rage throughout the kingdom, as usual that year, but he had private information that many of the Society's members had broken the oath of abstention. He decided, then, to strike at the very roots of Christmas. Johnny gave up his job on the Drainage Supply Board. He gave up all his prospects, and financed by a few supporters, retreated for 2 years to study the roots of Christmas. Then, all jubilant, Johnny produced his next and last book, in which he established either that Christmas was an invention of the early fathers to propitiate the pagans, or it was invented by the pagans to placate the early fathers. I forget which. Against the advice of his friends, Johnny entitled it Christmas and Christianity. It sold 18 copies. Johnny never really recovered from this, and it happened about that time that the girl he was engaged to, an ardent abolitionist, sent him a pullover she had knitted for Christmas. He sent it back, enclosing a copy of the society's rules, and she sent back the ring. But in any case, during Johnny's absence, the society had been undermined by a moderate faction. These moderates finally became more moderate, and the whole thing broke up. Soon after this, I left the district, and it was some years before I saw Johnny again. One Sunday afternoon in summer, I was idling among the crowds who were gathering to hear the speakers at Hyde Park. One little crowd surrounded a man who bore a banner marked, "Crusade Against Christmas." His voice was frightening. It carried an unusually long way. This was Johnny. A man in the crowd told me Johnny was there every Sunday, very violent about Christmas, and that he would soon be taken up for insulting language. As I saw in the papers, he was soon taken up for insulting language. And a few months after, I heard that poor Johnny was in a mental home because he had Christmas on the brain and couldn't stop shouting about it. After that, I forgot all about him until 3 years ago in December. I went to live near the town where Johnny had spent his youth. On the afternoon of Christmas Eve, I was walking with a friend, noticing what had changed in my absence and what hadn't. We passed a long, large house, once famous for its armory, and I saw that the iron gates were wide open. "They used to be kept shut," I said. "That's an asylum now," said my friend. "They let the mild cases work in the grounds and leave the gates open to give them a feeling of freedom." "But," said my friend, "they lock everything inside, door after door. The lift as well, they keep it locked." While my friend was chattering, I stood in the gateway and looked in. Just beyond the gate was a great bare elm tree. There I saw a man in brown corduroys sweeping up the leaves. Poor soul, he was shouting about Christmas. "That's Johnny Geddes," I said. "Has he been here all these years?" "Yes," said my friend as we walked on. "I believe he gets worse at this time of year." "Does his aunt see him?" "Yes, and she sees nobody else." We were, in fact, approaching the house where Miss Geddes lived. I suggested we call on her. I had known her well. "No fear," said my friend. I decided to go in, all the same, and my friend walked on to the town. Miss Geddes had changed, more than the landscape. She had been a solemn, calm woman, and now she moved about quickly and gave short, agitated smiles. She took me into her sitting room, and as she opened the door, she called to someone inside. "Johnny, see who's come to see us." A man, dressed in a dark suit, was standing on a chair, fixing holly behind a picture. He jumped down. "Happy Christmas," he said. "A happy and a Merry Christmas indeed, I do hope," he said. "You're going to stay for tea, as we've got a delightful Christmas cake, and at this season of goodwill, I would be cheered indeed if you could see how charmingly it's decorated. It has Happy Christmas in red icing, and there's a robin, and—" "Johnny," said Miss Geddes, "you're forgetting the carols." "The carols," he said. He lifted a gramophone record from a pile and put it on. It was The Holly and the Ivy. "It's The Holly and the Ivy," said Miss Geddes. "Can't we have something else? We had that all morning." "It is sublime," he said, beaming from his chair and holding up his hand for silence. While Miss Geddes went to fetch the tea, and he sat absorbed in his carol, I watched him. He was so like Johnny that if I hadn't seen poor Johnny a few moments before sweeping up the asylum leaves, I would have thought he really was Johnny. Miss Geddes returned with a tray, and while he rose to put on another record, he said something that startled me. "I saw you in the crowd that Sunday when I was speaking at Hyde Park." "What a memory you have," said Miss Geddes. "It must have been 10 years ago," he said. "My nephew has altered his opinion of Christmas," she explained. "He always comes home for Christmas now, and don't we have a jolly time, Johnny?" "Rather," he says. "Oh, let me cut the cake." He was very excited about the cake. With a flourish, he dug a large knife into the side, and the knife slipped, and I saw it run deep into his finger. Miss Geddes did not move. He wrenched his cut finger away and went on slicing the cake. Isn't it bleeding?" I said. He held up his hand. I could see the deep cut, but there was no blood. Deliberately, and perhaps desperately, I turned to Miss Geddes. That house up the road," I said. "I see it's a mental home now. I passed it this afternoon." "Johnny," said Miss Geddes, as one who knows the game is up, "go and fetch the mince pies." He went, whistling a carol. "You passed the asylum," said Miss Geddes wearily. Yes," I said. "And you saw Johnny sweeping up the leaves." "Yes." We could still hear the whistling of the carol. "Who is he?" I said. "That's Johnny's ghost," she said. "He comes home every Christmas, but," she said, "I don't like him. I can't bear him any longer, and I'm going away tomorrow. I don't want Johnny's ghost. I want Johnny in flesh and blood." I shuddered, thinking of the cut finger that could not bleed, and I left before Johnny's ghost returned with the mince pies. Next day, as I had arranged to join a family who lived in town, I started walking over about noon. Because of the light mist, I didn't see at first who it was approaching. It was a man, waving his arm to me. It turned out to be Johnny's ghost. "Happy Christmas! What do you think?" said Johnny, or rather Johnny's ghost. "My aunt has gone to London. Fancy, on Christmas Day. And I thought she was at church. And here I am without anybody to spend a jolly Christmas with. And of course, I forgive her, as it's the season of goodwill. But I'm glad to see you, because now I can come with you, wherever it is you're going, and we can all have a happy go away," I said, and walked on. It sounds hard, but perhaps you don't know how repulsive and loathsome is the ghost of a living man. The ghosts of the dead may be all right, but the ghost of a mad Johnny gave me the creeps. "Clear off," I said. He continued walking beside me. "As it's the time of goodwill, I make allowances for your tone," he said. "But I'm coming." We had reached the asylum gates, and there, in the grounds, I saw Johnny sweeping the leaves. I suppose it was his way of going on strike, working on Christmas Day. He was making a noise about Christmas. On a sudden impulse, I said to Johnny's ghost, "You want company?" "Certainly," he replied. "It's the season of—" "Then you shall have it," I said. I stood in the gateway. "Oh, Johnny," I called. He looked up. "I've brought your ghost to see you, Johnny." "Well, well," said Johnny, advancing to meet his ghost. "Just imagine it." "Happy Christmas," said Johnny's ghost. "Oh, really?" said Johnny. I left them to it, and when I looked back, wondering if they would come to blows, I saw that Johnny's ghost was sweeping the leaves as well. They seemed to be arguing at the same time, but it was still misty, and really, I can't say whether, when I looked a second time, there were 2 men or 1 sweeping the leaves. Johnny began to improve in the new year. At least he stopped shouting about Christmas, and then he never mentioned it at all. In a few months, when he had almost stopped saying anything, they discharged him. The town council gave him the leaves of the park to sweep. He seldom speaks and recognizes nobody. I see him every day at the late end of the year, working within the mist. Sometimes, if there is a sudden gust, he jerks his head up to watch a few leaves falling behind him, as if amazed that they are undeniably there, although by rights, the falling leaves should be stopped. Well, that man seemed pretty torn up about Christmas. At least he seemed to come together over the New Year's. Okay, all right, enough. I'll see myself out. So, next week, we begin with the first installment of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. You might remember this from last year when Lily read it. We're just going to replay it for the holiday season. So you can listen to it in 3 separate installments starting next Thursday. This is going to take several weeks, but hopefully it puts you in the holiday spirit. Until then, have a wonderful night and stay cool, my ghouls. See you next week.